The sting on the back of my hand was sharp and sudden, a bright bloom of pain that sliced through the fog of my disbelief. It was from her nail, I realized as her fingers clutched mine with a desperate, theatrical strength. The pain was an anchor, dragging me from the nightmare of my memories into the surreal reality of the present. I instinctively touched my neck, my fingers searching for the wet, gaping wound that had stolen my breath and my life. There was nothing. Only smooth, unbroken skin. I drew in a deep, ragged breath, then another, savoring the simple, uncomplicated act of filling my lungs. The air was real. The pain on my hand was real. I had been reborn. My eyes focused on the scene before me, a tableau of misery and manipulation I remembered all too well. Kneeling before me, her face a masterpiece of tragic beauty, was Chloe, the woman my husband Daniel had always loved. Her 8-month pregnant belly was a deliberate shield, a proclamation of her claim. Behind her, my mother-in-law, Beatrice, hovered like a vengeful spirit, her face contorted with a hatred I had come to know intimately. And there he was. Daniel. My husband. The man for whom I had sacrificed everything, who had stood by and watched as a man with a kitchen knife ended my life in a frenzy of violence. In his hand he clutched a sheaf of papers, the divorce agreement. Amelia, we were classmates once, Chloe sobbed, her voice a delicate, breaking thing. I'm begging you. Please spare my child and me. She made a show of sagging, of beginning to kneel on the hard floor of our foyer. In my previous life, this act had shattered me, fueling my righteous anger and stubborn refusal. But now I saw it for what it was. A performance. Beatrice rushed forward, catching Chloe before her knees could touch the ground. You vicious creature, she spat, her narrowed eyes locking onto me. Making a pregnant woman kneel to you. I'm telling you now, you're getting a divorce whether you want to or not. Chloe was always supposed to be my daughter-in-law. The script was the same. Every word, every tear a perfect echo of the past. But I was no longer the same woman. In my first life I had just discovered I was pregnant that very morning. I had been bursting with a joy I planned to share, only to have my heart ripped out and stomped on. The fury and the sense of injustice had been all-consuming. Why should I, the wife of 3 years, the one who had slept in damp basements and lived on instant noodles to help Daniel build his business, be cast aside the moment his failed returned? Chloe had married a wastrel, a gambler, and now that her life was in ruins, Daniel was eager to play the white knight, no matter the cost to me. I had torn up the divorce papers that day. My refusal had set in motion a chain of events that ended with Chloe being pushed down a flight of stairs by loan sharks 2 weeks later. 2 lives extinguished. And Daniel had looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred and said, "You owe Chloe a life. It's time you paid her back." He had made me pay. With infidelity, with humiliation, and finally with my life. Fine, I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through Chloe's sobs. This time I'll let you all have your way. The 3 of them stared at me, their expressions frozen in shock. Daniel looked especially bewildered. He knew how much I had loved him. He had prepared elaborate lies about the company failing, about needing to divorce to protect me from debt. He was ready for a fight, for tears, for bargaining. He wasn't ready for this. I walked forward and plucked the papers from his slackened grip. Amelia, please, let's not be hasty, he began, the rehearsed line falling flat. But I was already signing my name. Amelia Reed. It flowed from the pen, a signature of liberation. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only sound in the room. I handed him his copy. He was so off balance he fumbled and the papers fluttered to the floor. Sorry, I said, my tone devoid of any real apology, but this is my house, not a landfill. Could you all leave now? As they continued to stare, dumbfounded, I reached into my handbag. I pulled out a different piece of paper, one I had been carrying with my own secret joy. I held it up for them to see. Oh, and one more thing. I'll handle this myself. It was my prenatal exam report. None of you are fit to be this child's father or grandmother. A flicker of something, perhaps a shred of human decency, crossed Beatrice's face, but it was quickly smothered by her devotion to Chloe. She patted Chloe's belly with a possessive pride. We don't care about that kid anyway. Daniel found his voice, his confidence returning with a cold sneer. Spare me. Don't think you can tie me down with a baby. Do whatever you want. It doesn't matter to me. I'm never going to leave Chloe. I love her. He wrapped his arm around Chloe's shoulders and she melted into his embrace, the perfect picture of a rescued damsel. The sight that had once filled me with searing jealousy now only filled me with a cold, clear understanding. He was a man who would abandon his own flesh and blood to raise another man's child, all for the sake of a woman who saw him as her backup plan. I let my gaze rest on Chloe's pronounced bump. Wow, such boundless love. Truly admirable. I began to clap, slow, sardonic applause that echoed in the tense silence. Chloe's face paled. Beatrice looked from her to me, a seed of suspicion planted. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice sharp. Daniel panicked. "Don't listen to her, Mom. She's just trying to stir up trouble. Let's go already." He began herding them toward the door, a frantic energy in his movements. As the front door finally closed behind them, the lock clicking into place felt like the closing of a tomb, the tomb of my old life, my old self. I leaned against the door, letting out a breath I felt I'd been holding for a lifetime. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. It was mine. All the memories of my previous life washed over me, not as a crippling wave of trauma, but as a lesson etched in blood. We had all been classmates. Daniel and I had grown close after university, building a life and a logistics company from the ground up. I had found the hidden photo album on his laptop years into our marriage, filled with pictures of Chloe. He had admitted to a past crush, dismissed it as ancient history. But I had seen the flicker of regret in his eyes when he mentioned she was married. When her marriage to the gambler Leo fell apart, Daniel became her constant savior, paying off her debts, offering a sympathetic ear. And I, the fool, had been too busy trying to be the perfect wife, stepping back from the business as he suggested to focus on starting a family, oblivious to the fact that he was planning a different family entirely. In my previous life, their plan had been simple. Daniel would pay off Leo's crushing debts to the loan sharks, and in return, Leo would grant Chloe a divorce and relinquish her to Daniel. My refusal to comply had been the wrench in their gears, leading directly to Chloe's death and my own murder. But not this time. This time I had signed. I had set them free. And in doing so I had freed myself. I spent the rest of the day in a state of serene detachment. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Chin, and handed everything over to her. The assets, the divorce proceedings, all of it. Let Daniel and Chloe live out their drama. I had a new life to protect. My own. A few days later I booked a one-way ticket to Bali. In my last life I had barely had a single good day. Orphaned young, raised in a state home, I had clawed my way into college and built a career through sheer force of will. My marriage to Daniel had been another form of struggle, and becoming a housewife had only exchanged one set of burdens for another. The cooking, the cleaning, the constant pressure from Beatrice to produce a grandchild, it had worn me down to a nub. This time it would be different. True happiness begins with loving yourself, and I was finally ready to learn how. I didn't return until the day our divorce was officially finalized. I came back glowing, my skin sun-kissed, my spirit light. I wore a brand new emerald green dress that complemented the new light in my eyes. I had my hair styled and put on makeup not for him but for me. The moment I saw Daniel and Chloe at the courthouse, I saw the shock in his eyes. He couldn't hide it. I looked happy, carefree, free. It wasn't the reaction he wanted. He wanted a haggard, heartbroken woman, her eyes swollen from crying. His ego couldn't compute my radiance. Chloe noticed his stare and pinched his arm hard. He snapped back to reality. "Why are you so late?" he snapped, his impatience a thin veil for his discomfort. "Hurry up. We've got a prenatal appointment to get to." I just smiled. The papers were signed and stamped with brutal efficiency. As we walked out of the courthouse, now legally strangers, Daniel suddenly stopped and grabbed my arm. "When the baby is born," he said with a magnanimous air that made me want to laugh, "I'll pay child support. But don't expect anything else from me. I'll never leave Chloe again." I rolled my eyes so hard I saw my own brain. I shook off his hand and walked away without a word. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the man was astounding. Did he truly believe I was bluffing about the pregnancy? That I would bear his child alone, pining for him forever? He was pathetic. When I had loved him, he had used that love as a weapon against me. Now that I had taken it back, he was adrift, his sense of self crumbling. Before leaving the courthouse, I stopped by the restroom. And there, in a shadowy corner of the lobby, I saw them. Chloe locked in a passionate, desperate kiss with a man. That man was none other than her ex-husband, Leo. So the devoted, star-crossed lover's narrative was already cracking. Daniel believed he was her savior, but he was just a pawn, a wallet with a heartbeat. Chloe saw me, and a flicker of guilt was quickly replaced by a smug, defiant glare. She mouthed the words, "Who do you think he's going to believe? Me or you?" I gave her a slow, deliberate smile and walked right past her. They were all so tiresome. I had a life to live. And the first thing on my agenda was taking back control once and for all. The division of assets was a cold, clinical process overseen by Sarah Chin. I got the house, the car, and our substantial savings. Daniel got the company, Apex Logistics. It wasn't a massive enterprise, but it was profitable, the fruit of years of our shared sweat and sacrifice. It was a fair split on paper. But I knew its value was about to plummet. Word came to me through the business grapevine that the moment the ink was dry, Daniel had rushed to mortgage the company to the bank. The loan, a significant sum, wasn't for expansion or new equipment. It was to pay off the mountain of high-interest debt that Leo had accrued. Daniel was literally betting our life's work to fund another man's vices, all for the chance to play hero to Chloe. The very next day they posted a picture of their marriage certificate online. Daniel's grin was wide, ecstatic, the look of a man who believed he had finally won the grand prize. I looked at that picture, at his blissful ignorance, and felt nothing but a distant, cold pity. A week later I walked into the hospital. My mind was resolved, but my heart was a battlefield of grief and grim necessity. The child I had wanted so desperately in another life could not be born into this one. It would forever be a chain linking me to Daniel and his toxicity, a pawn they would use against me. The guilt for the life that never was in my first timeline was a heavy stone in my stomach, but I knew this was the only path to true freedom. Only by cutting all ties could I truly be free. As I was leaving the recovery room, feeling hollowed out but light as if a physical weight had been excised, I passed through the maternity ward. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing. "Family of Chloe Miller," a nurse called out. And like clockwork, Daniel and Beatrice rushed forward, their faces a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. "We're here," Beatrice said, her voice trembling with excitement. The nurse began explaining the delivery details, and I learned that Chloe had gone into labor early. I froze doing the math. This was the exact day she had died in my previous life. Pushed down the stairs by loan sharks I had refused to let Daniel pay. But this time the trajectory had changed. This time she had survived. However, the nurse's tone turned grave. Due to severe complications and hemorrhaging, Chloe had to undergo an emergency hysterectomy. She would never have children again. Beatrice, for a fleeting moment, looked stricken, but the nurse placed a swaddled newborn boy in her arms, and her grandmotherly pride surged back. She beamed, her earlier concerns forgotten. No one seemed overly concerned with Chloe's fate in that moment. Daniel moved to take the baby, his face soft with a wonder that had never been there for me. But a figure stepped out of the shadows and beat him to it. "I'm the baby's father," Leo declared, his voice ringing with possessiveness. "I get to hold him first." He plucked the baby from Beatrice's arms with a smooth, practiced motion. Beatrice stood frozen, her arms still cradling the shape of the infant, her face a mask of stunned incomprehension. She stared at Daniel's empty hands, and I could almost hear the gears grinding to a halt in her mind. The second-hand embarrassment was so acute I had to look away. After a long, painful silence, Beatrice snapped out of her daze. She grabbed Daniel's arm, her fingers digging into his suit jacket. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, her voice a low, shaking whisper. "Whose baby is this really?" The scene was drawing stares. A crowd was gathering, sensing the live drama unfolding outside the delivery room. Daniel's face flushed a deep, mortified red. He had never been so humiliated. He tried to pull his mother aside. "Mom, stop this please," he begged. "Chloe's baby is mine." He barely got the sentence out before Beatrice's hand connected with his cheek in a sharp, cracking slap. Her whole body trembled with rage. "How dare you lie to me?" she shrieked, her composure shattered. "You seriously want to raise someone else's child? Are you trying to kill me with rage?" Daniel stood there, head bowed, not daring to make a sound. Meanwhile, Leo was cooing at the baby, the sounds of his soothing voice a stark, mocking contrast to the familial meltdown beside him. It was the final straw for Daniel. The humiliation, the theft of his moment, the smug presence of Leo. It boiled over. He lost control, roaring as he launched himself at Leo, his fist connecting with the other man's jaw. "What the hell are you doing here? Give me the baby. He has nothing to do with you." "But I'm the biological father." Leo shot back, shielding the child with his body before shoving Daniel away. The two men descended into a full-on brawl right there in the sterile hospital hallway, fists flying, grunts of pain echoing. Beatrice started shrieking, nurses rushed in, onlookers scattered. It was pure, unadulterated chaos. I turned and walked away. I had lost all interest. It was just the first act of an absurd farce I had no desire to watch. That night, as I was drifting into a fitful sleep, my phone buzzed persistently on the nightstand. I picked it up, squinting at the screen. It was Beatrice. "Amelia, are you asleep yet? How are you feeling? Have you been to the doctor? Is the baby okay? I was too emotional that day. I want to apologize. Don't hold it against me. You're pregnant now. You need to take care of yourself. If you need anything, just let me know. No matter what's going on between you and Daniel, we'll take full responsibility for the baby. The Miller family won't back away." Message after message popped up, each more desperate than the last. She even sent a digital red envelope, a token for nutritional supplements. I stared at the screen, a cold laugh bubbling in my chest. Oh, now she remembered I was pregnant? Wasn't it her who had said the Miller family didn't care? I felt no pity, only a grim satisfaction. I went to my photos, found the clear, clinical image of my completed surgical report, and attached it to a message. Too late, I typed and hit send. Then, without a moment's hesitation, I blocked and deleted her number. The action was swift, final. A wave of instant refreshment washed over me. I could practically hear her scream of rage through the phone lines, 100 miles away. The grandson she had been so obsessed with had turned out not to be her son's. And her precious new daughter-in-law had lost her ability to have children the moment she walked in the door. It was a double defeat, a karmic checkmate. My body recovered with a swiftness that surprised me. My resolve, however, was ironclad. A few days later, I began the work of building my new company. I used the savings from the divorce and I sold the house, the scene of so many betrayals, to fund it. I found a sleek, modern office space in the same business district where Apex Logistics was located. I knew this area like the back of my hand. I had helped build its reputation. It was the perfect location. And as fate would have it, my new company, Pinnacle Solutions, ended up right next door to Daniel's. It was a deliberate choice. I wanted to be a constant, visible reminder of what he had thrown away. I wanted to be the ghost at his feast, the thorn in his side. One afternoon, as I was overseeing the installation of new furniture, a familiar, saccharine voice called my name. "Amelia." Oh, what a fortunate coincidence. I turned to see Beatrice standing there, holding a delicate-looking insulated container. She was smiling, a strained, unnatural expression that didn't reach her eyes. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd bring you this," she said, her voice dripping with a false warmth that made my skin crawl. "It's premium bird's nest soup. I had a friend bring it back from overseas. It's for your health." I just stared at her, too stunned to speak. Was this the same Beatrice who had sneered at me for years? The one who had called me a vicious creature, just weeks ago? Seeing my silence, she pressed on. "Don't be upset with me. I've been by your house several times but no one was there. Then I heard you sold it and opened a new business." Her eyes darted around my new, pristine office, a flicker of something, envy? Calculation, in their depths. Her sudden change of heart put me on high alert. Something was definitely off. I wasn't about to accept anything from her. "I'm fine, Beatrice," I said bluntly, crossing my arms. "Didn't Chloe just give you a grandson? Why aren't you home taking care of him? What are you doing here with me?" At the mention of the baby, her face twisted like she'd just bitten into something rotten. The mask of kindness slipped and the bitter, spiteful woman I knew resurfaced. She immediately launched into a tirade against Chloe, calling her shameless, a deceitful harlot who had dared to trick her son and pass off another man's child as Miller blood. She clutched my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Amelia, sweetie," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured sincerity. "I regret everything. I was wrong. You're the only true daughter-in-law I've ever had. I tried to pull my hand away but she held fast. You still have feelings for Daniel, don't you? She pleaded. Once you've recovered, maybe you can give him another child. A real heir for the Miller family. I'm begging you as a mother. There was the real reason for her visit. After all her cruelty, all her disdain, she now wanted me to be a broodmare for her family line. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it made me see red. I was about to curse her out and throw her out of my office when I spotted something through the glass walls. Daniel was walking past my office door with several men in sharp suits. I recognized them instantly. Major clients of Apex Logistics, men I had personally wine and dined to secure their business. They were here for a meeting. An idea cold and brilliant sparked in my mind. God, it seemed, was indeed looking out for me. I instantly wrenched my hand from Beatrice's grasp. I took a step back, raised my voice, and let the tears I had been suppressing for a lifetime well up in my eyes. This is too much. I cried out, my voice trembling with a perfect blend of heartbreak and fury. How can you people bully me like this? Beatrice stared at me, utterly confused. Amelia, what? For 3 years of marriage, I sobbed, cutting her off. I treated you like my own mother. I've never done anything to wrong Daniel or this family. I pointed a shaking finger at her, pouring all the pain of my previous life into my performance. And how did you treat me in return? You lied to me, ganged up with another woman to force me into a divorce. I was pregnant at the time. That was your Miller family's own flesh and blood. How could you be so cruel? I saw Daniel and his clients stop dead in their tracks, their heads turning toward the commotion. Daniel's face was a picture of dawning horror. Sure, they say family scandals shouldn't be aired in public, I wailed, but I wasn't the one who did something shameful. So why should I be the one to stay quiet? In my last life, silence had gotten me nothing but a knife in the neck. This time I would burn it all down and let the world see the rot festering within the Miller family. I squatted down, pretending to break down in tears. And now you want me to have another child for your family? I choked out. What do you take me for? A baby-making machine? This is inhumane. I turned and ran back into my office, letting the door swing shut behind me. Once inside, I leaned against the wall, my tears instantly drying. A slow, triumphant smile spread across my face. I had just dumped every one of Daniel's dirty secrets at the feet of his most important clients. I didn't go far, just ducked to the side of the door and peeked out. Daniel had rushed over, his face a thundercloud of anger and humiliation. He grabbed his mother's arm. Mom, what the hell are you doing? He hissed, his voice low and frantic. Can you stop making things worse? Beatrice, already fuming from my performance, exploded at his tone. Who am I doing this for? You seriously want to spend the rest of your life raising another man's kid? Let the Miller family line die out. Mom, please, Daniel begged, practically dragging her away. Can we talk about this at home? But the damage was done. His clients looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. One of them, Mr. Carter, finally cleared his throat. Daniel, I think we'll have to reschedule, he said, his voice cold. This doesn't seem like the right time. Goodbye. The others murmured their agreement and followed him, turning their backs on a mortified Daniel. He tried to chase after them to salvage the situation, but Beatrice kept a firm claw-like grip on his arm. I don't care what you say, she shrieked, her voice echoing through the hallway. If I don't get a grandson, I'll never rest in peace. You owe me a grandson. You hear me? I watched the entire spectacle from my office, my heart beating a steady, victorious rhythm. Everything I had just pulled had used up every ounce of my acting skill, but it was worth it. Seeing the panic and desperation on Daniel's face was a balm to my soul. In our past life, I had made things far too easy for him. I had shouldered the burdens and hidden the scandals. No wonder he had never appreciated me. Let him suffer now. I was done carrying his weight. The business circle in this city wasn't that big. The news that I, the wife who had struggled and suffered alongside Daniel, had been heartlessly discarded and was now being harassed for a child, spread like wildfire. Daniel's character was being openly questioned. Over the next few days, one client after another defected from Apex Logistics to my new company, Pinnacle Solutions. I hadn't spent all those years in the logistics business for nothing. My abilities were sharper than his and the clients knew it. Of course, a part of their decision came from sympathy, I wouldn't deny that. But either way, my new company took off quickly, gaining momentum at an astonishing rate. To make matters even sweeter, I heard that after Chloe finished her postpartum recovery, she had joined Daniel's company in a managerial role. The classic new broom sweeps clean. She immediately set about firing a bunch of veteran employees, deeming them disloyal. I gladly scooped them all up. They were capable, experienced, and furious at their treatment. They were like reinforcements, and with them my company grew stronger than ever. The tide had turned. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was just getting started. The defection of Daniel's clients was a tide I rode with a calm, focused determination. My company, Pinnacle Solutions, wasn't just a rebound. It was a phoenix risen from the ashes of my old life, and it was built with a sturdier foundation. I knew the industry, I had the connections, and now I had a team that was fiercely loyal not to a paycheck but to a shared sense of justice and a leader who valued their expertise. One afternoon I had just seen off a client, an old university acquaintance named Julian Thorne. He'd wanted to invest in Apex Logistics the previous year, but Daniel had refused, muttering something about Julian having ulterior motives. After spending just a few days working with him on a joint venture, I could see Julian was straightforward, brilliantly innovative, and his business ethics were impeccable. Daniel's paranoia, I realized, had been a projection of his own duplicity. "Speak of the devil," I murmured to myself as I turned from the curb and nearly collided with a disheveled figure. It was Daniel. His eyes were bloodshot, his suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. Before I could utter a word, he stormed up, grabbing my arm with a bruising force. "So this is how you do business now?" he barked, his breath smelling of stale coffee and frustration. "Dressing like that just to seduce men? Don't you have any shame?" I yanked my arm free, staring at him as if he were a strange insect. "What the hell are you barking about?" My voice was ice. "What I do has nothing to do with you. You're allowed to chase your true love, but I have to stay pure and untouched? Are you stuck in some ancient dynasty? You're like a leftover remnant from a fallen empire that refuses to move on." The insult hit its mark. His face flushed a mottled red, a mixture of embarrassment and raw anger. But beneath it I saw something else, confusion and a flicker of doubt. He was wondering if I really didn't love him anymore, or if this was all an elaborate act to win him back. That twisted confidence of his, the kind I had spent years carefully building, was now the very thing that crippled his understanding. He couldn't comprehend a world where he wasn't the center of my universe. He stood in silence for a moment, trying to compose himself, to act as if he were magnanimously letting the matter slide. His expression softened into a pathetic attempt at concern. "Didn't I tell you my mom's in the hospital?" he asked, his tone implying I was a neglectful monster. He had messaged me. It was true. Beatrice had fallen ill the day of the scene outside my office. The stress and the public humiliation had sent her blood pressure soaring, exacerbating a pre-existing heart condition. It had gotten serious. But what the hell does that have to do with me? I scoffed, turning to walk away. He chased after me. "Don't walk away. My mom's in the hospital, and you're not even going to check on her." I burst out laughing, a sharp, humorless sound. "Are you hearing yourself? You're such a devoted son, huh? Your mother's in the hospital, and instead of you or your wife taking care of her, you want me, your ex-wife, to do it? Do you even hear how ridiculous you sound?" As I spoke, I kicked him lightly in the shin to keep him from getting too close. "You used to do these things," he mumbled, sounding like a petulant child. "Chloe doesn't know how to." He stopped himself, but it was too late. I picked up the thread, my voice dripping with scorn. "So, I was supposed to keep throwing myself at your feet, slaving away for your mom like some maid just because you thought it gave me a shot at winning you back? Is that what you actually think? You really are full of yourself." Daniel stood frozen, the words he'd wanted to say stuck in his throat, choking him. I just laughed, the sound light and clear in the tense air between us. "A man without self-respect is like a rotten cabbage. Stop trying to disgust me. Just get lost." The veins on his temple bulged, his face flushing an angry, apoplectic red. His hand shook as he pointed a finger at me. "You'll regret this." He finally stormed off, a portrait of impotent rage. I hoped, truly hoped, that this time the message had finally seared itself into his brain. I didn't love him anymore. I hated him. I was utterly, completely disgusted by him. For a while after that I barely saw him. My days were filled with the vibrant, challenging work of building Pinnacle. One evening after work, I happened to be walking behind a few of his company's female employees. Their hushed, gossipy tones carried on the quiet street. Apparently, he's been spending most of his time at the hospital taking care of his mother, one said. Well, Mr. Miller kind of brought this on himself, another replied, her voice laced with schadenfreude. Back when his ex-wife was around, he never had to worry about any of this. Shoo, keep your voice down, a third warned, glancing around nervously. If that new supervisor hears you, we'll both be packing up by tomorrow. But someone else snorted dismissively. So what? I've been thinking about switching over to Ms. Reed's company anyway. Mr. Miller doesn't know what he's doing. He spends all day holed up in his office with that new manager, Chloe, and no one knows what they're doing in there. Exactly, the first woman chimed in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. I passed by their office the other day. It was the middle of the day, but the doors and windows were all shut tight. My heart gave a little skip. Could it be? Was the facade of their perfect, hard-won love already cracking under the mundane pressures of life and business? Second later, I had my answer. I saw Chloe walk out of the Apex building, and right behind her, carrying a diaper bag, was none other than Leo. Unbelievable. He wasn't even trying to hide it. The audacity of this woman, keeping her lover and the father of her child right under her husband's nose. What's that saying? When someone's been spoiled long enough, they really start to think they're untouchable. Still, it wasn't any of my business. I had enough on my plate just keeping my own company running. Their drama was a distant spectacle, a train wreck I observed with detached curiosity. Time flew by, and another 2 weeks passed in a blur of productive work. One afternoon, I was in my office going over quarterly reports when I suddenly heard a familiar voice yelling from the street below. I leaned out the window and saw Daniel standing on the pavement, his hair a total mess, his scruffy beard making him look years older. He was yelling at Chloe, who stood before him, a picture of wounded innocence. You keep giving him money. That's bad enough, but now you've brought him into the company. Do you even understand the kind of mess he's made this time? He looked like he hadn't slept, let alone changed clothes. He didn't even have the guts to have this confrontation inside his own building, choosing instead to air his dirty laundry in public. Chloe burst into tears on cue, crying as if someone had flipped a switch. I didn't think he'd be so careless, she wailed. I just thought that if he had a stable job, he wouldn't go back to gambling. I already knew what they were talking about. The gossip mill was efficient. Leo, in his new nepotistic role at Apex, had been responsible for a major, time-sensitive shipment. He had completely forgotten to send it out. When the client sent someone to check on it, Leo had the nerve to curse them out. The order had a signed contract, plain as day. Now Apex was facing staggering penalties for breach of contract. That man was a walking disaster, and Daniel was on the verge of a meltdown. How long are you going to keep bailing him out? Daniel roared, his voice cracking. Do you even know who you're supposed to be living your life with? I've done everything for you. You said you didn't know how to do housework, so I did it. You said you couldn't take care of people, so I did that too. I've been running back and forth between the hospital and home. I've become a damn wreck. These are all things you're supposed to be doing as my wife. I couldn't help but smirk. So, the moment a man is forced to do a fraction of the emotional and domestic labor, he suddenly discovers his talent for whining. Chloe was sobbing hard, her voice breaking with a masterful fragility. But he's still my son's biological father. Before we got married, you said you'd do anything just to be with me, even die for it. And there was the classic white moonlight effect. Her soft, delicate words, laden with manipulation, acted like a charm on Daniel. I watched, fascinated, as the fury drained from his face, replaced by a familiar, dopey devotion. Her subtle jab, "You've been thinking about your virtuous ex-wife again, haven't you?" was the final masterful stroke. It redirected his anger back onto me, the perpetual scapegoat. "It's not that I don't love you," she murmured, sealing his capitulation. Sure enough, he couldn't resist. He pulled her into his arms right there on the street, whispering sweet nothings as if he'd completely forgotten the reason for his rage in the first place. They didn't notice me watching from the window above, my face a deadpan mask. Go ahead, be in love. Knock yourselves out, I thought. But do you really have to bring me up every damn time? Soon after, Chloe was forced to resign from her post at Apex. Officially, It was to restore confidence in the senior management team. Unofficially, it was a face-saving measure. But Leo stayed on. Daniel, in a stunning display of weak-willed folly, merely demoted him and moved him to the warehouse, thinking that physical separation would solve the problem of his wife's enduring loyalty to another man. That told me everything I needed to know. Daniel was well aware of where he stood in Chloe's heart. He just didn't want to admit it. He was like a man clinging to a beautiful gilded cage, refusing to see that the door was wide open and the world outside was calling his name. He had told me once in my previous life, even if she wants my life, I'd give it to her willingly. But looking at him now, he didn't seem so willing anymore. The heat of the moment had cooled, replaced by the dreary, debt-ridden reality of his choices. What they can't have will always be what they want the most. And Daniel was finally realizing that he had gotten what he wanted, and it was rotting in his hands. With Julian Thorne now the largest shareholder in Pinnacle after me, his sharp business acumen and fresh capital allowed me to finally do something I'd always dreamed of. I took a sabbatical and went abroad for an intensive executive management course. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but the company had needed me, and then the pressure to have a baby had taken over. Now I had no attachments, no burdens. It was the perfect time to invest in myself. While I was away, disconnected from the day-to-day drama, a few juicy updates still found their way to me through Julian. I heard that after lying low for a while, Chloe started showing up at the company again frequently and often brought her infant son along. It wasn't long before the truth was an open secret. Daniel's son wasn't actually his. More shocking news followed. Beatrice, now back home, had accidentally fallen down the stairs and was paralyzed from the waist down. The official story was an accident, but the whispers were less kind. The rumor was that Leo had been in the house. Another confrontation had ensued, and in the struggle, Beatrice had taken a terrible fall. And finally, the piece of news that sent a chill down my spine even from thousands of miles away. Rumors were swirling about Daniel's flirtatious relationship with the new secretary at his company. When Julian discreetly forwarded me a photo one of the employees had secretly snapped, I recognized the woman at a glance. It was Sienna. So she had shown up again after all. The woman whose manic-depressive brother had been the instrument of my murder. I felt a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach, followed by a spark of fierce, vindictive relief. Relief that I had run fast enough and built walls high enough that no matter how sharp the knife in her brother's hand, it wouldn't reach me this time. Their path of destruction was continuing, but I was no longer in its way. By the time I returned home, more than half a year had passed. I had left in the tentative warmth of early spring and was coming back to the biting chill of deep winter. As I waited for Julian to bring the car around at the airport arrivals, a cold wind smacked me in the face, a harsh welcome back to reality. That's when I spotted a familiar silhouette crashing through the crowd in a panic. He was chasing two older, distinguished-looking men shouting breathlessly. "Mr. Carter. Mr. Wong. Please don't go. Just give me one more minute. This crisis is only temporary. The company won't collapse. Please reconsider. Don't pull out your investments." It was Daniel. He was running so fast he nearly grabbed Mr. Carter's sleeve several times, but their assistants formed a human wall, blocking his path. He was drenched in a cold sweat, his suit jacket flapping open, his tie askew. In his desperation, he tripped over his own feet and fell flat on his face on the polished airport floor. He looked like a complete mess. Finally, the two men stopped. Mr. Carter turned, his expression one of profound disappointment. "What else is there to say, Daniel? We gave you chances, but you were the one who misused company funds and never gave us a proper explanation. And now what? Your wife ran off with all the money? You might as well just sit back and wait for the bank to seize what's left of the company." Mr. Wong added, his voice colder. "Back when Amelia was around, nothing like this ever happened. You've lost all credibility with us. This is the end." With that, they walked into the departure gate without a backward glance. Daniel kept yelling, trying to call them back, but they didn't even slow down. I knew those two men well. They were among Apex's original investors. I was the one who had worked so hard to win them over. Watching Daniel destroy everything we had built together still left a bitter taste in my mouth. Misappropriating company funds. The phrase echoed in my mind. So Chloe had funneled the money to Leo. But what caught me off guard was what they said about Daniel's wife taking all the money and running. What did that mean? It looked like I'd missed the climax of the show in the past 6 months. As I was getting into Julian's warm car, I noticed Daniel looking in my direction from his humiliated position on the floor. Our eyes met. He immediately scrambled to his feet like a kid caught stealing, panic and a dawning, horrifying regret written all over his face. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw him in the rearview mirror, standing alone, staring after the car with a look of utter desolation frozen on his features. The kingdom he had betrayed me for was now a pile of ashes, and he was finally feeling the cold. The ride from the airport was quiet, the hum of the luxury car's engine a stark contrast to the chaotic scene we'd just left. Julian glanced at me, his expression a mixture of concern and grim satisfaction. "Rough homecoming," he said finally. "You could say that," I replied, watching the city lights blur past. "Fill me in, Julian. What happened?" "His wife ran off with all the money." Julian let out a long sigh. "It's worse than you think, Amelia. 3 days ago Chloe and Sienna disappeared. They didn't just empty the company accounts. They took everything. They even got to Beatrice." I turned to look at him, stunned. "Beatrice? How?" "Power of attorney," he explained, his lips pressed into a thin line. "They forced her, a paralyzed woman, to sign over control. They mortgaged her old house, the one she'd lived in for 40 years. Cleaned it out. Leo was in on it, of course. They were a trio of vipers." I was silent, processing the sheer, breathtaking ruthlessness of it. That Chloe would steal from the company didn't surprise me. But to prey on a bedridden, paralyzed woman? That was a new low. And Sienna. Her involvement confirmed my darkest suspicions from my previous life. This had been a long con. So Sienna was working with Leo and Chloe all along, I mused, the pieces clicking into a horrifying picture. In my past life, it was all a setup to gain control of Daniel's assets. The thought was chilling. My murder hadn't just been about revenge for Chloe. It had been about removing an obstacle to their financial plot. I had died too early to see the final act. But no matter what the truth was, I said, my voice hardening, this entire disaster is Daniel's fault. He opened the door and invited the wolves in. I felt not a shred of sympathy. He had made his bed of nails, he could lie in it alone. Of course, that didn't stop him from trying to drag me into his ruin. He appeared at my office door a week later, a pathetic figure clutching a bouquet of deep red roses. They were out of season, expensive, and utterly meaningless. His face was a mask of forced cheer, a ghastly parody of a romantic suitor. "Amelia," he said, his voice too loud, too bright. "These are your favorite." I remembered. I didn't take the flowers, nor did I say a word. I just leaned against my desk and stared coldly at him. If I remembered correctly, tomorrow was the bank's final deadline. If he couldn't repay the loan, Apex Logistics would be officially seized and auctioned. The stiff, desperate smile on his face told me everything. He had wrestled with his pride for a long time before coming here. He could grovel for Chloe, he could beg clients with his head bowed low, but I was the one person he least wanted to face. And yet I was his last hope. After a long, uncomfortable silence, there was a sudden, shocking thud. Daniel dropped to his knees on the hard floor of my office. The roses fell from his hand, scattering petals like drops of blood. "Amelia, I was wrong." His voice was a broken whisper. "You were right all along. Chloe's a liar. She never loved me. He was always in love with that gambling addict, Leo. They cheated behind my back, brought him into our home while I was at the hospital. My mom caught them together, and they pushed her down the stairs." He was crying now, real tears tracking through the grime on his face. "I regret everything. Amelia, I was blind. Completely blind. I made a huge mistake. I'm not even human. Can you forgive me? Please give me one more chance. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." He sounded sincere. He even slapped himself in the face a few times, the sharp cracks echoing in the quiet room. But all it did was make me even more disgusted. Let's take his words at face value. The incident with Beatrice must have happened at least 2 months before Chloe and Sienna fled. So, what had Daniel been doing during those 2 months? He hadn't divorced Chloe. He hadn't gone to the police. He hadn't stood up for his mother. He had done nothing. If that's how he treated his own mother, there was no way his so-called remorse was real. Most likely, all he'd done in that time was try to win Chloe back, to recapture the illusion he had sacrificed everything for. He was the most pathetic kind of lapdog, one who licks the hand that beats it. When I stayed silent for a long while, Daniel probably mistook my revulsion for softening. He suddenly lunged forward on his knees, wrapping his arms around my calves, his face pressing against my skirt. "Amelia, you're the kindest person I know," he babbled, his voice muffled. "I knew you still loved me. You won't leave me like this, right? Just help me through this one crisis and I swear." Bang. I slammed my hand on the desk, the sound like a gunshot. I shot to my feet and kicked him away with all my strength, my heel connecting solidly with his shoulder. "Security!" I shouted, my voice ringing with a fury that had been building for 2 lifetimes. As the security guards came in and dragged him out, Daniel looked completely stunned, his mouth agape. He couldn't believe it. In his mind he had always been my white moonlight. However he had treated Chloe was how he believed I should treat him. Too bad he never moved me, not even for a second. Otherwise, I would have deserved every bit of pain I got in my past life. Daniel's company was officially seized by the bank. A public auction was announced. Julian and I agreed without hesitation. We had to buy it. It was prime for the expansion of Pinnacle Solutions, and it was a piece of my own history I intended to reclaim and reshape in my image. This was ours for the taking. The day we won the auction, a profound sense of closure settled over me. It was done. The physical manifestation of my past struggles and betrayals was now legally mine. I was in my new office, the one that had once been Daniel's, contemplating the view when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Amelia Reed?" a formal male voice asked. "Yes. This is Sergeant Evans from the Metropolitan Police. We need you to come down to the station to identify a body." The world seemed to slow down. I knew. Even before he said the name, I knew. "Whose body?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. "A male identified as Daniel Miller. We found your contact information among his effects." I hung up the phone, my hand steady. I had thought I was prepared, but the reality was still a shock. Julian came with me, a solid, silent presence. At the morgue, even though I had braced myself, the state of Daniel's corpse was horrifying. His body was a canvas of deep, savage stab wounds. His face especially was completely mangled, a pulpy, unrecognizable mess. The fatal wound was on his neck, a gaping slash that had nearly severed his head from his body. It was a frenzy of violence, easy to imagine the blind rage behind each strike. Alex frowned, his face pale. "Who the hell did your ex piss off? That kind of hatred doesn't come from nowhere." A nearby officer, Sergeant Evans, stepped forward. The killer was apprehended at the scene. It was Marcus Finch, Sienna Finch's younger brother. The one with the documented manic-depressive episodes. He explained the case. After Sienna vanished, her brother had been scouring the city for her. Since Daniel had been romantically involved with Sienna, Marcus assumed Daniel knew where she was hiding. He had confronted Daniel repeatedly, demanding answers. But Daniel, of course, had none to give. Finally, in a fit of psychotic rage, Marcus had stormed into what was left of the Apex offices with a kitchen knife and hacked Daniel to death. So the knife had landed on Daniel after all. The instrument of my death in one life had become the instrument of his in this one. Call it karma. Call it fate. I called it justice. The police also told us that Chloe, Sienna, and Leo had fled the country together using illegal channels. It looked like they'd taken the stolen money and gone off to live the high life abroad. But Leo was a compulsive gambler. That kind of money, no matter how much, wouldn't last him long. I felt a cold certainty that their story was far from over. As we were about to leave the cold, sterile confines of the station, a bony, withered hand suddenly clutched the corner of my coat. I flinched, turning to see Beatrice sitting in a wheelchair, her body twisted, her face a slack mask of paralysis. Her eyes, however, were alive with a desperate, pleading light. She could no longer speak, only let out faint, guttural sounds. Tears streamed down her ravaged face, a river of regret for a sea of mistakes. It seemed she had 1,000 things she wanted to say. "I'm sorry. You were right. Help me." But no matter what she tried to express now, it was far too late. She and her precious son had only themselves to blame for ending up like this. His undying devotion to Chloe hadn't just been his doing. She had helped feed it, nurturing his obsession and vilifying me at every turn. We walked out into the crisp winter air. Julian let out a long, slow sigh. "Heaven may forgive acts of fate," he muttered. but no one survives the consequences of their own making. I glanced at him a little surprised. You don't think she's pitiful? I asked. Beatrice was now a shell, a prisoner in her own body. On top of that, her only son had died a gruesome death. A mother burying her child was the cruelest fate imaginable. Julian simply shrugged, his gaze clear and unwavering. They made their own choices, Amelia. What's there to pity? He looked at me, a small, understanding smile touching his lips. Don't tell me you're feeling saintly now. I let out a short, sharp laugh. As if. I lifted my chin, squaring my shoulders, and walked forward with confident strides. The past was finally, truly buried. The future was mine alone. A few months later, a major news story broke, splashed across every national outlet. A massive human trafficking ring had been dismantled in a series of coordinated international raids. A key suspect, a man surnamed Lynch, had been captured in a border city, and his testimony had led authorities to several hidden compounds. The report listed the names of several victims who had been rescued from horrific conditions. 2 names jumped out at me, listed one after the other. One surnamed Miller, the other Finch. Chloe and Sienna. They hadn't been living a life of luxury. They had been sold, likely by Leo after he had gambled away all their stolen money. The high life they had envisioned had been a one-way ticket to hell. I closed the news browser, a complex mix of emotions swirling inside me. There was no joy, no schadenfreude. Only a cold, quiet acknowledgement of the universe's relentless balance. They had sought to use and destroy others for their own gain, and in the end they had been used and destroyed in turn. Their story was over. Mine was just beginning. I turned back to my work, to my company, to my life. A life I had fought for, a life I had reclaimed, a life that was finally and completely my own. The silence in my new corner office was profound. It wasn't the empty silence of my old house after Daniel left, but a productive, potent quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the city below and the occasional turn of a page. This office, once Daniel's sanctum, now bore my imprint. The dark, heavy furniture was gone, replaced with clean, modern lines and soft, neutral colors. A single, vibrant orchid sat on my desk, and on the wall hung an abstract painting I'd bought on my trip abroad. A swirl of blues and golds that spoke of depth and possibility. This was no longer the seat of Apex Logistics. It was the command center of Pinnacle Solutions, and it was mine. Integrating the remains of Daniel's company into my own was a complex but satisfying surgical procedure. We stripped the rotting parts. The debt, the toxic contracts Leo had bungled, the lingering stench of betrayal. We kept the healthy tissue, the physical warehouse space, a handful of loyal, capable drivers and logistics managers who had stayed through the chaos out of necessity, not loyalty to Daniel. With Julian's financial acumen and my industry knowledge, we streamlined, optimized, and innovated. Within 6 months, the expanded Pinnacle Solutions was not just profitable. It was becoming a regional leader. One evening, Julian stayed late, sprawled comfortably on the sofa in my office as we went over expansion plans. The professional respect between us had slowly deepened into a warm, easy friendship. He was the only person who knew the full, unvarnished truth of my past with Daniel. "The board is thrilled," he said, tossing a report onto the coffee table. "Your numbers are a masterclass in corporate turnaround. From the ashes, etc." "Our numbers," I corrected him with a small smile, leaning back in my chair. "I couldn't have done it without you. Or your faith in me when I was just a scorned woman with a startup." "I never saw you as scorned," he said, his tone gentle but serious. "I saw you as a dormant volcano. Daniel was just the fool who built his house on your slopes." He paused, studying me. "Do you ever think about them, Chloe? Sienna?" The question hung in the air. I looked out at the city lights, twinkling like a field of fallen stars. "I try not to," I said honestly. "But when I do, I don't feel vindicated. I just feel nothing. A void where all that pain and anger used to be. It's a relief." "And Beatrice?" I sighed. That was a more complicated void. I had received a call from a social worker a month after Daniel's death. Beatrice, paralyzed, destitute, and with no living family, had been moved to a state-funded long-term care facility. I was listed as her emergency contact, a cruel joke from a past life. I'd gone to see her once, a decision born more of morbid curiosity than compassion. The facility was clean but carried the faint, sweet smell of disinfectant and decay. Beatrice was a shrunken figure in a motorized wheelchair, her head lolling to one side. A thin line of drool traced a path from her mouth to the stained collar of her housecoat. Her eyes, once so sharp and critical, were cloudy and vacant. When the nurse had said, "Beatrice, you have a visitor." "It's Amelia," there had been no recognition, only a low, continuous moan. I had stood there for 5 minutes, watching the shell of the woman who had made my life a misery. The victory I had expected to feel was absent. There was only a profound, chilling sadness. I left a small, anonymous donation at the front desk for her comfort. Not for her but for my own peace, to finally lay the last ghost to rest. "She's a ghost," I said to Julian, pulling myself back to the present. "And ghosts can't hurt you anymore." He nodded, understanding without needing more words. "Good. Then it's time to stop looking backward." He stood up and stretched. "Come on. Let's get out of this office. I know a place that makes pasta that will make you forget all your troubles, past and present." I laughed, a genuine light sound. "Is that a promise?" "It's a guarantee." As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Prenatal appointment, Dr. Evans, 10 a.m. A different kind of quiet settled in my heart. This was a secret I had kept from everyone, even Julian. After the hollowing procedure following my divorce, I had believed that chapter was closed. But life, it seemed, had other plans. A fling with a charming Italian architect during my studies abroad had resulted in this unexpected, terrifying, and exhilarating development. This time it was different. There was no pressure, no expectation, no desperate hope to save a failing marriage. This child was mine, chosen by chance and welcomed on my terms. It was a testament to my new life, a life built not on the ruins of another, but on a foundation I had poured myself. The next morning, sitting in Dr. Evans's sunny office, looking at the grainy black and white ultrasound image, I felt a love so fierce and pure it stole my breath. This was my future. Not a company, not a revenge fantasy fulfilled, but this tiny, blinking heartbeat. "Everything looks perfect, Amelia," Dr. Evans said, smiling. "Yes," I whispered, my fingers tracing the outline on the screen. "Perfect." The months that followed were a whirlwind of a different sort. I managed my company with a focused intensity, knowing soon my attention would be divided in the most wonderful way. Julian noticed my occasional fatigue, my newfound aversion to the strong coffee I used to live on, but he attributed it to the stress of rapid expansion. I let him. It was during my 7th month, while I was reviewing a contract in my office, that my assistant, Sarah, buzzed me. "Ms. Reed, there's a woman here to see you. He says her name is Sienna Finch. She's quite insistent." The name was a bucket of ice water down my spine. Sienna. Found. Or perhaps she had never been lost. I had assumed she was still trapped in the nightmare of the trafficking ring, or dead. I took a deep, steadying breath, my hand instinctively resting on the swell of my belly. My child kicked, a firm, reassuring thump. "Send her in," I said, my voice calm despite the frantic beating of my heart. The woman who walked in was a specter of the one I remembered from the photo. Her clothes were cheap and hung loosely on her frame. Her face, once pretty in a sharp, calculating way, was gaunt and etched with lines of hardship and fear. But her eyes were the same, intelligent, desperate, and burning with a frantic energy. "Amelia Reed," she said, her voice raspy. She didn't wait for an invitation, collapsing into the chair opposite my desk. "Hard to find. And you've done well for yourself." Her eyes darted around the luxurious office, a flicker of envy and resentment in their depths. "What do you want, Sienna?" I asked, cutting to the chase. I had no patience for games with this woman. "He's looking for me," she whispered, her fingers twisting together. "My brother, Marcus. They released him. Insufficient mental capacity to stand trial. He's out. And he's angry." A fresh wave of cold fear washed over me. The knife. It was back, a free-floating threat in the world. "Why come to me? I have nothing to do with you or your brother." "He blames me for getting caught," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "But he blames you too. He has this twisted idea. He thinks if it weren't for you, Daniel would have been with me, I wouldn't have run, none of it would have happened. He's not rational." This was the danger of the mentally unstable. Their logic was a labyrinth with a monster at its center. In his fractured mind, I was the original sin. He's fixated on you, she pressed, leaning forward. I need money. Enough to disappear, to go somewhere he can't find me. You have it. You owe me that much. I actually laughed, a short, incredulous sound. I owe you? You were part of a scheme that destroyed a man and contributed to his death. You helped ruin a paralyzed woman. And you think I owe you anything? I have information, she hissed, her composure breaking. About Daniel. About that night. Don't you want to know? I sat perfectly still. I know everything I need to know. Do you? A sly, ugly look crossed her face. Did you know that Daniel was going to leave her? The night before he died, he came to my apartment. He was broken. He said he finally saw Chloe for what she was. He said he'd made the biggest mistake of his life letting you go. He talked about you, Amelia. He said you were the only woman who ever truly loved him, and he'd been too blind to see it. Her words were meant to be a weapon designed to hurt, to unsettle. And for a moment they did. They painted a pathetic picture of Daniel's final hours, a man drowning in regret. But the picture had no power over me anymore. It was just a sad story about a man I used to know. That's a very touching story, I said, my voice flat. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring him back. It doesn't undo what he did. Her face fell, realizing her trump card was worthless. Please, she begged, the desperation returning. He'll kill me. Or both of us. I stood up, my posture firm, my body shielding my unborn child. No, Sienna. I'm not funding your escape. Your problems are not mine. I survived you once. I'll survive you again. I pressed the intercom. Sarah, please see Miss Finch out. And ensure security is aware she is not to be allowed back in the building. Sienna's face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. You bitch. You think you're safe in your glass tower? He'll find you. He'll. Her threats were cut off as Sarah entered with a security guard. As they escorted her out, her screams echoing down the hall, I remained standing, my hand on my belly, feeling the steady, strong kicks within. He was wrong. I wasn't in a glass tower. I was in a fortress I had built with my own 2 hands. And I would protect my kingdom and my heir with everything I had. The monster was loose. But this time I was no longer prey. I was the hunter, and I was waiting. Sienna's visit left a residue of unease, a cold draft in the warm, secure world I had built. I didn't live in fear, but I moved with a heightened awareness. I hired a discreet ex-military security consultant, a quiet, formidable man named David, who conducted a threat assessment and implemented new protocols for my home and office. My driver was replaced with one of his team. Paranoia, perhaps, but it was a calculated paranoia. I had too much to lose now. Julian noticed the new security presence. Over dinner one night, he asked me about it directly, his brow furrowed with concern. Amelia, is everything all right? The security detail, the changed routines. It feels like more than standard corporate procedure. I looked at him, at his open, honest face. He had become my closest friend, my most trusted partner. He deserved the truth. I took a sip of water, choosing my words carefully. Do you remember Sienna Finch? Daniel's secretary. His face darkened. The one who fled with Chloe and the money? The same. He came to see me. Her brother, the one who killed Daniel, has been released from custody. He's unstable, and Sienna seems to believe he's a threat. To her and potentially to me. Julian's hand tightened around his fork. What? Why do you? That's insane. His logic is his own. Sienna asked for money to disappear. I refused. And you think he'd actually come after you? The protective anger in his voice was a palpable force. I think it's a possibility I can't afford to ignore. Not anymore. I paused, then took the final leap of faith. I met his gaze. Julian, I'm pregnant. The shock on his face was absolute. It morphed through confusion, calculation, and finally settled into a deep, profound concern. Amelia. Congratulations, he said, the question in his tone. Is it? Are you? It's mine, I said firmly, a small smile touching my lips. Just mine. I met someone in Italy. It was brief and it's over. This is my choice. My child. The relief in his eyes was immediate, followed by a warmth that made my heart constrict. Then congratulations, he said, and this time it was sure and heartfelt. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's wonderful news. But it also changes everything. The threat level just skyrocketed. His business brain was already whirring. We need to. It's handled, Julian, I reassured him. I have David on it. The best. I wanted you to know. You're my best friend. You deserve to know why I'm suddenly acting like a secret agent. Thank you for telling me, he said, his hand still covering mine. And for the record, you're not acting like a secret agent. You're acting like a mother protecting her child. There's a difference. The look in his eyes held something more than friendship then, something deeper and more tender that sent a jolt through me. Weeks turned into a month. The due date drew closer, a looming, beautiful deadline. My life became a careful balance of board meetings and birthing classes, contract negotiations and nursery preparation. The fear Sienna had brought began to recede, lulled by the mundane magic of impending motherhood and the robust security surrounding me. Then the call came. It was from an unknown number, but this time it was David. Amelia. His voice was calm but with an undercurrent of urgency. We have him. Marcus Finch. He was apprehended 20 minutes ago trying to scale the perimeter fence at your estate. I sank into the nearest chair, a wave of relief so powerful it made me lightheaded. Is he in custody? He is. The police are with him now. But there's more. He wasn't working alone. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Sienna. No. It was Chloe Miller. I felt the world tilt. Chloe? Rescued from the trafficking ring only to, what? Seek revenge? How? Why? According to Marcus's ramblings to the police, she found him after she was released from the shelter for trafficking victims. She sought him out. She's been feeding his delusions, directing his rage toward you. She told him you were the one who tipped off the authorities about the embezzlement, that you orchestrated their capture. She painted you as the mastermind behind all their misfortunes. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. The psychological manipulation was masterful. She had taken a damaged, dangerous man and turned him into her personal weapon, all from the shadows. While I had been building my life, she had been building a bomb, and she had almost succeeded in throwing it into my world. Where is she now? I asked, my voice tight. That's the problem. We don't know. She wasn't with him. She's in the wind. The police are looking for her, but she's a ghost. The relief I'd felt curdled into a new, more insidious anxiety. Marcus was a blunt instrument. Chloe was a scalpel. He was in custody, but she was still out there, her poison already spilled. Would she try again? Or was this her final failed gambit? I spent the rest of the day giving a statement to the police from the safety of my home, David a silent, watchful presence nearby. The official threat was neutralized, but the shadow remained. That night as I lay in bed, my child turning somersaults inside me, I thought about Chloe. Not with hatred, but with a strange, distant pity. Her entire life was a performance, a series of manipulations to get men to provide for her. From Leo to Daniel and now to a mentally ill killer. She was forever the damsel in distress, but the role had become a prison of her own making. She would always be running, always be scheming, never knowing peace or true security. In a way, her punishment was already her life. I, on the other hand, was done running. I was done fighting the ghosts of my past. I had a company to run, a child to bring into the world, and a life, my life, to live. 2 weeks later, on a calm, clear morning, my waters broke. Julian, true to his word, was there in minutes, a model of efficient panic. The drive to the hospital was a blur, his hand holding mine, his voice a steady, reassuring murmur. The labor was long and intense, a trial by fire. But as I pushed, surrounded by a team of skilled professionals and with Julian's unwavering support, I felt a strength I never knew I possessed. This was my battle, my victory, my creation. And then a cry. A sharp, healthy, indignant wail that filled the room. It's a girl, the doctor announced, placing a squirming, perfect bundle on my chest. I looked down at her tiny, scrunched-up face, her shock of dark hair, her perfect little fingers. All the pain, the fear, the struggle of 2 lifetimes, melted away in an instant, replaced by a love so vast and all-consuming it felt like the beginning of the universe. Tears streamed down my face, happy, cleansing tears. Julian leaned over, his own eyes suspiciously bright, and kissed my forehead. She's beautiful, Amelia. Just like her mother. We named her Serena. For the peace she represented, the peace I had fought so hard to win. As I held my daughter in my arms, watching the sunrise paint the hospital room in hues of gold and pink, I knew the war was finally over. The hunters had been thwarted, the ghosts had been laid to rest. The past had no claim on me anymore. I was no longer Amelia, the victim. I was no longer Amelia, the avenger. I was just Amelia. A mother. A woman whole and free at the dawn of her own story. The first year of Serena's life passed in a blissful, sleep-deprived blur. It was a world of midnight feedings, of gummy smiles that could light up the darkest night, and of a love so fierce it felt like a physical force field around us. My penthouse, once a symbol of sleek, solitary success, was now cheerfully cluttered with pastel-colored toys, a gleaming stroller and the sweet milky scent of baby. Julian became a constant, grounding presence. He wasn't just my business partner anymore. He was Uncle Jules, the man who could make Serena giggle with a silly face and who brought me coffee exactly when I needed it most. The unspoken thing that had flickered between us the night I told him about my pregnancy slowly grew, nurtured by shared takeaways over a sleeping baby and late-night conversations about everything and nothing. It was a gentle, steady burn, a far cry from the tumultuous inferno of my first marriage. We didn't rush. We built brick by careful brick. At work, I mastered the art of delegation. Sarah, my assistant, was promoted to chief of operations, a role she filled with terrifying efficiency. I learned to lead from home via secure video calls, my office often the sun-drenched nursery. Pinnacle Solutions didn't just survive my maternity leave. It thrived, proving the strength of the foundation we had built. I was no longer the hands-on manager of every detail. I was the strategist, the visionary, and most importantly, a present mother. The world of Daniel, Chloe, and Sienna felt like a distant, poorly written tragedy. There were no more sightings, no more threats. The police had never located Chloe. David's periodic updates consistently stated the same thing. No digital footprint, no financial trail, no signs of life. It was as if she had truly vanished. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night, I would wonder if she was dead in a ditch somewhere, or if she had managed to find another man to leech onto, spinning a new web of lies in a new city. Either way, she was no longer my concern. Marcus Finch was remanded to a high-security psychiatric facility, a permanent resident this time. The knife was locked away for good. Serena was my redemption, my living, breathing proof that joy could bloom from the ashes of despair. Her first steps were taken in our living room, her chubby hands clutching my fingers before she bravely let go and stumbled into Julian's waiting arms. Her first word was "Mama," spoken with perfect clarity one morning as she patted my cheek. In those moments, the last lingering shadows of my past life dissolved in the brilliant light of her existence. On Serena's first birthday, we threw a small party. The guest list was intimate. Julian, Sarah, David and his wife, and a few of my most trusted employees. The penthouse was filled with laughter and the sound of children playing. As I watched Serena, a cupcake smeared all over her face, gleefully tearing into wrapping paper, my heart felt so full I thought it might burst. Julian came to stand beside me, slipping an arm around my waist. "Happy?" he murmured into my hair. I leaned into his solid warmth, watching our daughter. "I didn't know it was possible to be this happy," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever spoken. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Serena was finally asleep, exhausted from her big day, Julian and I sat on the balcony overlooking the glittering city. The air was warm, carrying the distant hum of traffic. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his tone casual, but I could hear a thread of nervousness beneath it. "Oh, a new merger," I teased, taking a sip of my sparkling water. "Something like that." He turned to face me, his expression serious in the dim light. "Amelia, these last 2 years, watching you build this life, raise that incredible little girl, it's been the greatest privilege of my life. I love you. And I love Serena as if she were my own." My breath caught in my throat. We had been careful, tiptoeing around the word, letting our actions speak for themselves. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart hammered against my ribs. He didn't open it, just held it in his palm. "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I know your history with that institution is complicated. What I'm asking is, will you and Serena move in with me? Officially. Let me come home to you both every single day. Let me be a proper family." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This wasn't a grand, dramatic gesture. It was a quiet, profound commitment. It was a promise of shared mornings and sleepy evenings, of school runs and parent-teacher conferences. It was everything I had ever truly wanted. I didn't need to think. I placed my hand over his, the box nestled between our palms. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Julian. Nothing would make me happier." The move was a gradual, joyful process. Julian's house, a spacious, modern home with a large, secure garden in a family-friendly neighborhood, became ours. We decorated a nursery for Serena right next to our bedroom. We argued good-naturedly about paint colors and where to put the bookshelves. It was blissfully, wonderfully normal. One Saturday afternoon we were at the local park. Serena, now a confident toddler, was determinedly climbing the small slide with Julian spotting her from below. I sat on a bench nearby, a book forgotten in my lap, simply watching them. The sun was warm on my face, the sound of their laughter mingling with the chirping of birds. This was it. This was the peace I had fought for, killed for, been reborn for. My phone sitting on the bench beside me vibrated. It was a news alert. I almost ignored it, unwilling to let the outside world intrude on this perfect moment. But a name in the headline caught my eye, and a chill, ancient and familiar, traced a path down my spine. Body of unidentified female found in Riverside apartment. The subheadline was more specific. Police investigating possible link to cold case of Chloe Miller, wanted for embezzlement and questioning in connection with a homicide. The world did not stop. The sun still shone. Serena still laughed as Julian caught her at the bottom of the slide. But for me, time seemed to stutter. I clicked on the article with a numb finger. The details were sparse. A woman, estimated to be in her mid-30s, had been found in a rundown apartment in a bad part of the city. The death was being treated as suspicious. She had no identification but a distinctive tattoo. A small white lily on her ankle had led a sharp-eyed detective to cross-reference with missing persons files and the old warrant for Chloe Miller. I stared at the words, my mind perfectly blank. Then I closed the browser, tucked my phone back into my bag and took a deep, steadying breath. I looked up at Julian, who was now swinging a giggling Serena between his arms. He met my gaze, his smile faltering for a second as he saw my expression. I gave him a small, reassuring shake of my head and a genuine smile. It was over. Truly, finally over. He lifted Serena onto his shoulders and walked toward me, his eyes full of questions. "Everything okay?" he asked, his hand finding mine. I squeezed his hand, my gaze shifting from his concerned face to Serena's joyful, innocent one. The past was a closed book. A sad, grim story with an ending that had been written long ago. "Everything," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being, "is perfect." The confirmation came a week later, a brief, formal email from the detective in charge of the case. Through dental records, the body had been positively identified as Chloe Miller. The preliminary cause of death was a drug overdose, though the circumstances were unclear. There were signs of long-term addiction and sex work. She had been living under an assumed name, and her death had likely gone unnoticed for several days before a neighbor complained about the smell. I read the email once, then deleted it. There was no satisfaction, no sense of closure beyond the simple administrative finality of it. Her story was a cautionary tale of a life built on manipulation and dependency, ending in the exact kind of squalor and anonymity she had spent her life trying to avoid. It was a pathetic, lonely end. I felt a pang of something, not pity but a profound weariness for the whole sordid cycle of it all. That evening I lit a candle in the quiet of my study. Not for Chloe but for the woman I used to be, the naive, hopeful Amelia who had loved Daniel, who had been destroyed by his betrayal. I let the flame burn for a few minutes, watching the light dance, acknowledging the pain and the strength it had forged. Then I blew it out, watching the thin plume of smoke rise and dissipate into nothingness. It was my final goodbye. The years that followed were the richest of my life. Serena grew from a toddler into a bright, curious little girl with my dark hair and Julian's kind eyes. Pinnacle Solutions continued to expand, but it was no longer my sole identity. I found a balance I had never thought possible, stepping back from the day-to-day grind to serve as chairman of the board, focusing on long-term strategy and philanthropic ventures. I started a foundation for children from state homes, providing scholarships and mentorship, ensuring other little girls like me had a fighting chance. Julian and I never did get married. One night a few years after we'd moved in together we talked about it. You know we could, he'd said, his fingers laced with mine as we watched the sunset from our garden. If you ever wanted to. I'd looked at our home, at our daughter chasing fireflies on the lawn, at the life we had built with such care and intention. Why would we? I'd asked softly. This feels more sacred than any piece of paper. This is a choice we make every single day. He had smiled, that warm, understanding smile that still made my heart flip, and kissed me. You're right. This is enough. This is everything. On Serena's first day of school, I stood at the gate with the other parents, a knot of emotion in my throat. She marched into the classroom without a backward glance, her small backpack bouncing, ready to conquer the world. Julian put his arm around me, pulling me close. She's going to be fine, he whispered. I know, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. We all are. That night, after we'd put an exhausted but exhilarated Serena to bed, I found myself standing in the doorway of her room, watching her sleep. The nightlight cast a soft glow on her face, so peaceful, so untouched by the darkness I had once known. She was growing up in a world of love and security, a world where her mother was whole and happy. This was the victory. Not the company, not the wealth, not the downfall of my enemies. This quiet, ordinary, extraordinary life. My journey had been brutal. It had been paved with betrayal, murder, and a second chance born of unspeakable pain. I had been a victim, a survivor, an avenger, and a builder. But now, standing in the warm, safe silence of my daughter's room, with the man I loved waiting for me downstairs, I had finally become what I was always meant to be. I was simply and completely myself. Amelia. The story of my past was over. The story of my life was just beginning. And for the first time in either of my lives, the future looked endlessly, beautifully bright. The end.